In this video tutorial, we will talk about the column chart. So the column chart is perhaps the most common type of visualization tool. I'm sure in your life you must have seen hundreds of column charts and you must have drawn many column charts. In this lesson, we will see some of the finer points, some of the nuances of when to draw a column chart, when not to draw a column chart, etc. And what are the different types of column charts. So a simple column chart has one quantitative variable and one either a categorical variable or a time variable. So the one quantitative variable goes on the y-axis with rectangles proportional to the value. So those are the columns. The categorical variable or the time variable, we have one of the two that goes on the x-axis. If it's a categorical variable, not the time variable, then the column chart is essentially doing a comparison of values for various categories at one point in time. So it's a static comparison. If, on the other hand, you have time on the x-axis, we're doing a temporal comparison or comparing values over time or finding a trend. Can we have more than one quantitative variable? Yes, you can have two or more, in which case the simple column chart will not suffice. We may have to draw a clustered column chart or a stacked column chart or a 100% stacked column chart. Of course, when you have more than one quantitative variable on the y-axis, it's important that we make sure that these variables have the same unit. So if one is in dollars, others should also be in dollars. The y-axis normally starts at 0 and goes as high as the largest measurement that we are tracking. Negative values are allowed on a column chart. So let's look at an example of a simple column chart that does a static comparison, which means on the x-axis we have a categorical variable. So suppose this is our data. So this is our categorical variable, country, and this is our quantitative variable, GDP in trillions for 2019. So this goes on the x-axis, the categorical variable, and the quantitative variable goes on the y-axis. So here we have one column of data, and this column is really labels for entities. So 14.14 is the value of this quantitative variable for this entity, China. So since we have values for several entities of one quantitative variable, we have a column of data, and this categorical variable serves as labels for the entities. So this is how a column chart looks like for this data. So categorical variable goes on the x-axis and the quantitative variable goes on the y-axis. And in this case, this categorical variable is nominal, so the order does not matter. And because it's nominal, the shape of this curve has no interpretation. So even though it looks like an inverted U shape, that's not something that's worth noticing because the order does not really matter. Now, there's a slight variation of this column chart. Here, what we did, same categorical variable, same quantitative variable, but we have sorted it from highest to lowest values. So this goes on the x-axis, y-axis. It's the same graph, except this time we have added some value to this graph by displaying the columns in descending order. So let's see how to draw these column charts in Excel. So here's our data. So we have one quantitative variable, GDP of 2019 in trillions of US dollars. We have one qualitative variable, this case nominal, and this categorical variable serves as labels for entities. So one column of quantitative data and one column of labels for the entities. Okay, so how to draw the column chart? We can select this data and go insert, and we can select this 2D column chart, and that's what we get. It picks up the quantitative variable's name as the title of this chart. Now, in Excel, you can add some bells and whistles to your chart by clicking on this chart elements plus sign. For example, you can add titles to the axes, you can add some data labels, you can add the table. For example, you can add the table so you can actually see the numbers here. You can add axis titles. For example, you may want to say this is in trillions of US dollars. You can say country here, or you can just get rid of this. There, you have a column chart. And the other one, nothing new. I've just copied and pasted this table from here to here, and I have sorted based on the GDP. So the labels are also sorted. And I can do the same thing, just select this, insert a 2D column chart, and you have this. We can either add the data table like we did above, or we can add the data labels so that the numbers show on top of the columns. We can add title, and we can get rid of this. There. And we'll do one more type of column chart in this tutorial, and that's a column chart that shows trend over time. So we have data like this. This time we have the US GDP in trillions for various years. So that's my time variable, that's my quantitative variable. This goes on the x-axis, and the quantitative variable goes on the y-axis. So that's how this column chart looks like. So our time variable goes on the x-axis, and the quantitative variable, the US GDP, goes on the y-axis. So all the column charts can be drawn for showing trends over time. When the number of periods is large, a line chart is more appropriate. So let's say instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, instead of 9 different years, let's suppose you had 130. Then having 130 columns would not make much sense. You'd rather just have one line. So let's see how to do this in Excel. Okay, I have this data. Now, it's important to realize that the year is actually a number. Unlike here, country was a label, a text. Now, I have entered here this 1980 as a label. Look at this. There's an apostrophe here, which means it's a label. Whereas here, I have entered it as a number. So it's important to understand this difference because here it is entered as a text, not a number. So if I select this and say insert column, I get what I need. Whereas if I do the same thing here, even though just by looking at this table, this looks no different from the data here. But if I do insert column chart here, see I get a completely different graph. So what's the difference? Look at this. It is treating this column chart for two quantitative variables. So it's treating the year also as quantitative variable. So this is 1980, 1985, 1990, and so on. And this, you see these little red columns, they're the GDPs of USA. Now, I tried to put both of them on the same scale. So this is going from 0 to 2000, and this number is like 2.8. So this is not the right chart. The other thing you could have done, suppose you didn't know how to put numbers as text. You could say, okay, let me not select the year. Let me just select this, and I insert a column chart there. And then what you could do is, on the x-axis, you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So you can say, okay, right click on this and say select data. And then you can say horizontal axis labels, instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, make them these. Okay. So now this is how you can get the labels, even though this is a number. So those are two ways that you can draw a column chart when the label column happens to be number. You can either convert them to text, or you can just select the quantitative column and then edit the x-axis label and specify this range. Okay, so that's the end of this tutorial. We will do other types of column charts in the later tutorials.